Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. I am Dr. Celeste González de Bustamante, the director of the Center for Border and Global Journalism and an affiliated faculty member of the Center for Latin American Studies. And this is the second session in a series of alumni panels on media, the US-Mexico borderlands, and Latin America. The series is co-sponsored by the Center for Latin American Studies and the Center for Border and Global Journalism. If you haven't heard about the Center for Border and Global Journalism, our mission is to create awareness and support journalists in peril all around the world through research and outreach. And we're based, of course, at the U of A School of Journalism. The title of today's panel is Taking You There, Multimedia Storytelling in Unprecedented Times. The goals of this series are to highlight issues related to media, the borderlands, and Latin America, as well as to illustrate how an area studies degree like LAS combined with journalism can lead to much professional success in a variety of ways. And through these events, we hope to also improve understanding of the borderlands, Latin America, and the media. And of course, it's a special honor for me to be here as the moderator of today's panel because I too am a graduate of the MA program and in LAS. And so before we get into the actual panel, I want to acknowledge Colin Deeds, who's here, the Assistant Director of the Center for Latin American Studies, and Clara Migoya, who is a U of A Journalism MA student and the Title VI Center Media Assistant at LAS. And so here's the format for today's panel. I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then they will each provide us with a brief presentation, and we'll have a round of questions from me, and then we'll open up the floor for questions from you, members of the audience. And I just want to let everybody know that we are recording this session, and we will be sharing the recording with members of the public. So here I go, and I want to introduce these amazing panelists today. We have Luis Carlos Davis. He is an award-winning director and producer. His film projects have been exhibited in Mexico, the US, Chile, Colombia, and Europe. He holds an MA in Latin American Studies and a PhD in Teaching, Learning, and Sociocultural Studies from the UA. Also here today is April Lanuza. She is a digital producer for CGTN America, and she's a multimedia journalist currently based in Washington, DC. And she graduated from the U of A with a dual master's degree in journalism and Latin American studies. And she is coming to us from Minneapolis, where she is covering the trial of Derek Chauvin and who was charged, of course, in connection with the death of George Floyd. And so she'll be talking to us about her experience there. And Murphy Woodhouse is also on the panel today. He is a senior field correspondent for KJZZ. Before joining that station, he was a reporter at the Arizona Daily Star and the Nogales International. He has a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Montana and an MA in Latin American Studies from the University of Arizona. So now we're going to get started with these presentations from our panelists. Let's start with Luis Carlos Davis. Luis, take it away.
Well, just like a brief introduction. I was born and raised in Nogales, in this border town. I went to Nogales High School. I was always into the arts, like music, drawing, even though I can't draw, writing stuff. So eventually, I think I was able to find in cinema, in filmmaking, how to combine everything. You can write, the lightings, the moving images, and everything that I study, for example, like one of the good things that I studied in Latin American studies was that it was an interdisciplinary program. So basically, I was able to focus in international journalism, border studies, and media arts. That's where I met like Dr. Jennifer Jenkins. She's still one of my mentors. She has been really helpful to me all the time. And then when I did my PhD there at the U of A too, I was able to do it at the education department and I was able to do another interdisciplinary program that is very difficult at a PhD level. So I was able to focus on semiotics, film studies, and things like that. I did my dissertation. Part of it was like a film text, and another one was like a written text. So I was able to combine those things. So for me, that was very helpful, like to combine my passion and be able to do my PhD. And before I go on, I saw that somebody from the Gals is connected, Nicole Gonzalez, and she just got her PhD. So congratulations.
Congratulations, Nicole. And thank you, Luis Carlos. There you are. Congratulations. Good to see you. Let's go on to April. Are you available to, I saw you walking for a second. Are you available?
I'm about to enter the elevator. If you want to give me like.
Okay, well, let's go to Murphy then. Murphy, would you go ahead and start your presentation, please?
Sure, yeah. So I guess before kind of getting into the main thing I wanted to talk about, I'd like to just kind of give an overview of the Hermosillo Bureau itself. That's where I work down here in Hermosillo, Sonora, the capital of Sonora. That's actually one of two bureaus that KJZZ operates in Mexico, and to the best of my knowledge, we are the only NPR affiliate station that actually does operate foreign bureaus. And to the best of my knowledge, my colleague Kendall Blust and I, many of you likely know her, I believe that we are the only journalists reporting for a U.S. audience with a permanent presence in Sonora, which I don't think I'd have to convince many of you is a state of just extreme importance to Arizona. So I feel very lucky to be part of a project like this. I think it's pretty unique, and I think we're in a position to do some pretty interesting work. One of our main areas of coverage down here is of course the massive binational commercial relationship between Arizona and Sonora, and then the two countries more broadly. Billions of dollars of produce and manufactured goods cross back and forth through Arizona ports every single year. But that's really only a part of our coverage. We've really done a quite diverse array of stories in the nearly 3 years that we've been here. Kendall has done a lot of really fantastic reporting on a number of conservation efforts, doing, I think, some pretty impressive work on the status of jaguars and the endangered marine mammal, the vaquita. I've done stories on outdoor recreation, cycling, hiking, the ongoing fight for marriage equality in Sonora, certainly violence and insecurity to some degree. And I do not intend to bring it up again, but obviously the coronavirus and its very unequal impact here in Mexico, and certainly immigration and asylum, which are again dominating headlines. But for the rest of my time, I'd really kind of just like to talk about radio itself as a medium for reporting and telling stories. And I'd like to qualify everything I'm about to say by saying that I still very much feel like a very new radio reporter, still very much early on the learning curve. And what I have to say comes just as much from my experience as a listener and lover of radio as it does from being an actual producer of it. I really was drawn to the title of this panel, Taking You There. I think that does get at a power of radio that I've really come to love and respect. But I did not end up in radio intentionally. I had a long-standing desire to be a reporter in Mexico, and this was the opportunity that came along, and I jumped at it. I come from the print tradition of reporting. That's how I was trained. That's where most of my reporting experience comes from. And so this was a move that came with a lot of, I think, pretty dramatic changes. My basic view of the matter is that in terms of information density, print reporting is the gold standard. There's just a lot more information in your standard print story. Just to make that very real, when I was at the Star or the Nogales International, a typical daily story, probably 600 to 1,000 words would capture a lot of what I was turning in. Whereas a long feature or an enterprise story, well beyond that, sometimes as many as 2,000 or 3,000 words, sometimes even longer, probably in much rarer cases, but you can go, the internet goes forever. And newspapers usually have a lot of space. But it's a very different situation in radio. You know, the 30, 40-second spots that you guys hear all the time on your local NPR affiliates. I hope you listen, hope you support. That's 100 to 140 words. That's the vast majority of the stories that I do. And then in our features, which are longer, 3 to 4 minute, more in-depth stories, even those are just 800 words, 750 to 850 words probably. So there's just a lot less information in a typical broadcast radio story. But the point I really want to get across is that you're not just giving something up in that transition, you get something extremely important in return, and that of course is sound. That could be a father's voice breaking in the open desert, shovel in hand, searching for his missing son, or at least his remains. That could be a bass splashing into a boat and a father and son sharing the joy of the day's catch. That could be the rhythmic slaps of dough being formed into coyotes by expert hands. It could be picks wielded by mostly hunter and asylum seekers, breaking through rocks and hard soil, slowly punching trenches for the foundation of a growing shelter, all nearly within view of the border the men hope to soon cross. And so these are all, of course, things that could be written. I tried to write them here, and I tried to write them for the web. But I think placed side by side, I find time that the written words often just don't have the same punch. I don't think that there is a written substitute for hearing it for yourself, and I really think that the human voice can say so much more than the literal words printed on a page. As an avid listener of radio, I really just find it to be just an extremely, when done well, an extremely moving, evocative, and transporting way to tell stories. I don't think that it can take you all the way there. I'm not sure that there is a medium that can really accomplish that, but I think when done well, good radio can certainly take a listener much closer to important realities of a story. My favorite case study of this, I'm not going to bore you with my own reporting. My favorite way to kind of get this point across is the This American Life episode, The Outcrowd. Has anyone listened to that? I guess you can nod if that sounds familiar. It's just an exceptional work of radio reporting, and I'm certainly not alone in thinking that. The Pulitzer Prize Committee also thought that it was pretty good and awarded it the first ever audio reporting Pulitzer Prize last year, and I could not agree more with their decision. It's 2 pieces, one by the LA Times' Molly O'Toole, who looked at asylum officers rebelling against what they felt were immoral or illegal immigration policies of the Trump administration, and Vice's Emily Green reported on the extraordinary dangers faced by people returned to Mexico under the Remain in Mexico, or MPP program. If you have not heard it, I just really cannot recommend it more highly. Interestingly, to my point, there's a print version of each story. O'Toole's was published in conjunction with This American Life, and Green's actually came out a couple months before, and I read it when it came out. And I'm largely going to focus on Green's work, though both are just exceptional. I read it, her story when it first came out. It was good. I shared it. It was thorough, moving, extraordinary access. It was just kind of a firing on all cylinders, very good and important piece of print journalism. It basically covers the same ground. But the radio story, when it came out, it just completely destroyed me. It's one of the most emotional experiences that I've had with a piece of reporting in recent years, and really the only key distinction between them is sound, specifically the voices. In the radio story, we get to listen to a sister on the phone with kidnappers, negotiating the price of the release of her brother and his young child. We hear from the brother himself shortly before he is kidnapped. He happened to have a conversation with Emily while she was reporting. And then we hear from him several days after being released, and he could not even speak through his tears. And I was crying right along with him. And I just cannot imagine that I was alone in that. Like I said, I really do think that in terms of what you specifically learn about these policies, how they work, blah, 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 all of that, you're probably going to walk away from each equally informed in that respect. But when it comes to emotional impact, I mean, there's really not a comparison in my mind. And for a story like this, about really, I don't think there's another way to say it, the horrors faced by those expelled by the United States in some cases, it was definitely the radio version that got me as a listener closer to that truth. And again, like I come from the print tradition very proudly. I don't think it's at all impossible that I return to it. But radio, I think, is capable of doing some pretty powerful stuff. And I've certainly never reported anything as impactful as that. But I'm certainly down here trying to do stories that both move and inform. And I think the handful of times that I've been to some degree successful at that, the stories have really centered around the experiences of regular people who are the most impacted by whatever phenomenon or policy or whatever it is the story is exploring. I mean, that could be the brave women who lead groups of volunteers out into the desert to search for their missing sons, brothers, husbands, and other loved ones, doing work that federal and state authorities either can't do or won't do. That could be the informal workers here in Sonora and across Mexico, really just pushed to the breaking point or beyond it by both, of course, the economic fallout from the pandemic, the policy response to it, and the just extraordinarily anemic fiscal response by the Mexican state in response to all of that. Or asylum seekers who have given up on their dream of asking for refuge in the United States and instead do so in Mexico or Hermosillo, places that were never in their plans. And just to conclude, I'd like to say just a few things about how my time as a student, my 3 years as a master's student at the Center for Latin American Studies helped prepare me for that sort of reporting work. So at LAS, I obviously had the opportunity to learn about migration, immigration enforcement, Mexican and Central American history from leading scholars, and that specific knowledge has obviously served me very well in my time as a reporter in the Sonoran borderlands. But I also got opportunities to work on major research projects. Many of you know Jeremy Slack, who is one of the principal investigators on a very important and ongoing project looking at deportation experiences. I helped out with that and spent many nights at the migrant shelter in Nogales, Sonora, where the lived experience of those most impacted by U.S. immigration policy really came to form much of my understanding of those policies. And then I did my own research in Guatemala with returnees who themselves taught me a great deal about just the wildly destabilizing collision between debt financed migration and mass deportation. And I guess maybe the simplest way to say it is that my time at LAS it really taught me a lot about the importance of prioritizing and respecting the stories of impacted communities when trying to understand complex issues, or as I do now, report on them. I don't know. It's my time there has just been deeply relevant to the work I'm doing now, often in ways that are really just kind of beyond the facts I know or the specific information I acquired. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say. So I'll turn the time over now.
Thank you, Murphy. Some really great points that you made about radio and about the importance of being prepared through a degree like LAS. And there's some research out there on how we process information. We actually, in terms of our different senses, we actually hear things first and feel things emotionally based on the sound before actually we react to what we're seeing. So there's something biological happening there. That's not my area of research, but I think that gets to what you're talking about in terms of the immediacy and the effectiveness of audio storytelling. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to April, who's in Minneapolis. April, we're all very interested to hear what you have to say about how you prepared for your career right now, and also just what's going on over there, what has been going on in Minneapolis over the last couple of days since you've been there.
Well, yes. Hi, everyone. It is very cold in Minneapolis. So I work for CGTN America. I'm a digital producer based out of DC. And I've actually just been working for them a little over a year. I started October 2019. Mid-October, I came in as freelance, and then I became salary in around mid-February. And so, which around the same time is actually when we started to we were sent home for COVID. And so this Minneapolis trip is my first work trip and my first time like outside in the world for a while. So I got into Minneapolis Sunday morning, very early. And I was following the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin trial, or shall I say the Derek Chauvin trial, because George Floyd is not on trial. And well, as you guys heard, guilty on all three, came out yesterday. And so when I got here, it was very busy in terms of journalists. Like literally every single corner, you would see photographers and reporters camped out for their live shots. And since it was a guilty verdict yesterday and things resulted a lot calmer than a lot of people expected, it is a ghost town right now. All the reporters are gone. I mean, just as fast as they came, just as fast as they left. I actually will be finishing out the week here because tomorrow I'm going to go to Dante Wright's memorial service. And then Friday, I'll probably do some more work on Dante. And then I head out on Saturday. But in terms of work that I've done previously that has helped me, well, actually, before I even get to that, I would like to kind of build off of what Murphy was saying about the importance of sound. And so with digital, now my background is in TV and harder news. And so the video aspect that digital is involved with, I'm more familiar with. But in terms of what he was saying about using the power of sound, probably the most recent example is, so yesterday when, well, I started out in front of Hennepin County Courthouse because all the journalists, we were gathering there because we were thinking that someone was going to come out to do a press conference of sorts. But a lot of protesters and supporters, they all gather. There's like this little grassy patch. Some call it a park, but it's not really, it's really small. And just the people just started gathering there. And so when the verdict was read and it became official, I mean, everyone started cheering. And of course, everyone was really happy. Now, with CGTN, it was me for digital, and then we had 2 TV reporters here. And so the TV reporters were here downtown, so I figured there was no need for me here downtown. So I went over to George Floyd Memorial Plaza, or also George Floyd Square. And it is just this memorial that has assembled out in front of Cup Foods, which actually I was just there before I got back to the hotel. I was just there and I learned that the city is actually trying to take it down. And so people are trying to save it and keep it all there. But there outside of the Cup Foods, I mean, if you haven't seen it, they've got like this giant iron fist and there's flowers, teddy bears, all sorts of stuff, and posters, not just of George Floyd, but also Dante Wright, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. And so with that intersection, it's kind of blocked off. And they have a memorial in the center, and they also have memorials on both sides of the Cup Foods, because Cup Foods is like right on a corner. And they've kind of turned that little area into just like this little makeshift community spot type deal. And I also learned that there's a building across the street that they were able to get. And so they want to turn it into a museum and like a little community center. And they have like a little shed where you can get books. They have like a small community garden. Today, someone was giving out cupcakes. They were grilling. They were playing Prince, because today is the anniversary of Prince's death, and Minneapolis is the city of Prince. And so I was there today, but yesterday when I decided to go, it was, well, first of all, it was actually quieter there too than I had also expected. I thought there'd be, yes, there was cheering, and yes, there was chanting, but outside of that, it was calm. I mean, people were just gathering there, paying their respects. Someone got a cookout going. There was a band that started and people started playing music. And so what I did for a piece that it should have gone out today, because I did send it back to DC for posting. And it was kind of like sights and sounds of what Floyd Memorial Plaza looks like after a guilty verdict. So I have like shots where I got it, someone was cooking, grilling chicken. So I got it real close to get the chicken. You hear the sizzling and the smoke. And you also have the band coming in and people dancing and cheering. So with that, I was able to essentially combine all of the components or all of the little pieces to make that digital piece. So not just sound, but also visuals. And then there is a little bit of a writing component. So there are some words involved there. But that is probably the most recent example. And so in terms of how the UA helps me get here, the most blatant way that it helped me get here is, if you don't know, Frank Contreras. He is a correspondent based out of Mexico City for CGTN. And he also does a lot of work with the UA, and he's a Tucson guy. And so I met him through the U of A, through Celeste actually, and through classes. And so through him, he actually helped me get this job in the sense, well, he helped me prepare, he helped me establish some contacts. And when the opening first came up and I had reached out to him, I was like, hey, I'm thinking about working at CGTN America, like, can you give me the scoop? And he was like, oh, that's great. I think you'll do great there. So that's the most blatant way that the UA has helped me. But also in terms of, I wanted to make a switch from my hard news background into more long form storytelling, kind of docu-style type stuff. And so at UA, I did a lot of stuff related to the border. And then also my thesis was a 30-minute documentary about a Latino community in Williston, North Dakota. And so that was kind of like the first time I got to dip my toes into documentary work. And that form of long form storytelling also helps me get the CGTN America gig. It kind of gave me a little bit of the upper hand, not just because of the focus in Latin America, which is beneficial to CGTN because, well, one, on the team, I'm the only one who speaks Spanish and Portuguese, and I'm the only one with any relative knowledge about the Americas. So whenever stories would pop up, I was able to grab them. And so that is, it's just one of the biggest ways that the UA has helped me, connects, and getting some, I did some good work for my portfolio, and now I'm trying at least to just capitalize on all that and eventually do make it full-time into the documentary world.
Thanks for that, April. I should also say that you, in a year, you also were in DC during the insurrection. So these two huge events, just like back to back almost, pretty, important subjects, of course. And then as a journalist, pretty obviously exciting to be covering those things at this point in your career. I wanted to continue with this issue of topic of multimedia and ask Luis Carlos, you are also a video producer, director. And maybe you could talk about the importance of sound, the importance of video, obviously, and how you work with those two, and what you're up to these days in terms of some of your productions.
Wait, is that for me?
Oh, no, you're muted,
Oh,
Luis
okay.
Carlos.
There? Can you hear
We
me?
can hear you now, yes.
So yeah, I gotta agree with Murphy, right? Audio is so important that so every time you hear something, you're creating like these different narratives, right? So now if you add a layer of video, it's super powerful. And what I see with video is that, for example, to me, eyes are very important. So you can tell a lot about a story just by seeing how people react. Also, like to see in video those quiet moments. It's telling you a lot of information. Um, Also, what you have with video is the close-up, and I think it's very important. You can see it, like how the mouth changes depending on the subject, the eyes, hands. You see with the close-up. Also, you can see the things that you would see on a normal daily basis, but in a different way. So I think when you connect, if you're able to connect the audio and then the video, it's you can make very powerful stories. For example, like the documentary that I did part of my dissertation for my PhD, and I saw that Dr. Shore is there. Hi, Dr. Shore. She was really helpful in that project. But it was interviewing three sicarios, right? So they had masks, but for me, it was very important to see their eyes and their mouth. One thing was their mouth, so that people could see they were telling that story, right? But also like their eyes, because how they move. Like they say, like the eyes are the soul of the window to the soul. But I think it's very expressive. So I'm I did that documentary. I haven't released that documentary. My goal is to release that documentary this year, and like I said, it's on the lives of three sicarios. One in his 20s, the second one in his 40s, and the third one in his 60s. Um, and something else that I'm trying for the first time, I have a daughter. She's in Taiwan. She was born in Taiwan. I couldn't make it to when she was born because of the COVID situation. So when she was 3 months, I got to travel to Taiwan. So I'm also working editing right now a documentary on me traveling to Taiwan in order for me to meet my daughter, but I was in quarantine for 14 days. And I did it with two iPhones and my computer video. So, and I think it looks interesting. I mean, I'm collecting text. When I was like in this hotel for 14 days, 2 weeks, everything started like when I was flying there. I said I better do something, and I just had my iPhones. Now you can shoot like really high quality. So one of the challenging parts, once again, is the audio, because sometimes I think audio can be more important than video, because if you have good audio and the image is not that good, people will follow your story. But if it's the other way around, if the audio is very sharp but the audio is bad, you will lose the audience. They're not gonna. I mean, so audio is really. So that's what I'm working right now. Like I'm gonna push that documentary. Is gonna come out this year. The one is called El Monstruo, and the one I'm working on meeting my daughter is called Amor Chiquito, and I'm editing that one, and I think it's gonna be. And I'm very happy with. I mean, I don't know what's gonna happen, but I'm very happy with that documentary, because I had been trying to come up with the story, with a positive story, with something good, because I always question this. I always go into these dilemmas in my head. How come it's easier to capture the negative part, the evil part? And when you try to come up with a good story, uplifting stuff, at least for me, it's more challenging. And with this story, I was able to do it, and I feel good about it. So I don't know what's gonna happen, but I mean, I don't know. Everybody that does like stories, try to think I don't know why it's easier to capture evil than capture something positive, uplifting, at least for me. I don't know, you know. So I'm happy with like I said, I have a very dark project. That one on the Sicarios is very dark, and I have this one that has a lot of light. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm sure that working on the Amor Chiquito kind of helps you when you really are contemplating some of the dark side of the other El Monstruo. And that's just, you need to write about that also.
And
I want to
and I
hear
wanna-
more about that.
And I want to say something else really quick. When I did, like, for example, the stories on immigration, like 39 Miles and other projects, I thought I could take, this is something that I learned as a filmmaker. I thought I could take any project and do it, any subject. I thought I was strong enough. But when I do think that you have to pick the subject you're gonna address, because with that project, I really got destroyed, like big time. And now, and there were many times where I didn't want to finish it. I did it because I said, if I don't finish this project, it's going to destroy me. And then I'm not going to do any other projects. But I do feel that I got contaminated with the content of it. So you do have to be careful what subjects you address, and you have to be prepared. At least that's what happened to me, you know? And it took me a while to recover from that.
Well, I really appreciate you bringing that up and being so candid about that, because I think journalists or filmmakers sometimes don't talk about how these things impact you emotionally. And so I think that's really, I appreciate you bringing that up, Luis Carlos. And so the title in Monstruo sort of has many meanings for you, I'm sure. But you and others have touched on another subject I wanted us to address, and that is increasing risks for people doing work in not just Mexico, but in the United States, which, according to Reporters Without Borders, ranks 45th among 180 countries and is declining in terms of freedom of expression and press freedoms, whereas the top countries are Finland, Norway, and even Costa Rica is up there, number 6. So I wondered if the three of you could talk about how do you mitigate risk, especially, maybe we could start with you, Luis Carlos. How do you try to mitigate risk and stay true to the story that you're covering, and sometimes try to protect yourself and your sources when you might be in a kind of a tight situation?
Okay, so you want me to start?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm gonna talk a little bit on the last project because that was the most like difficult, right? Most challenging. So I took different, I designed like a way to work around this project. So one of the rules I had for myself was that I was the only one who was gonna do this project. I didn't get anyone involved, because I knew that if something was to go bad or wrong, I don't know, I could live with that. So basically, I had to shoot, do the lighting, do the interviews, do everything on my own, went everywhere on my own. So, and I didn't get anyone involved, because I can't guarantee anything. I couldn't guarantee that everything was going to come out like fine. The other thing was that, and I think this is very important, I was very straightforward and honest. I told these people, like, okay, I'm gonna do this project. I'm gonna maybe send it to film festivals. A lot of people are gonna see it. I had to talk to them, maybe things that they didn't think about. And I don't know if it's gonna do good or not, but straightforward. I didn't try to lie so that I would get the interview. Once I was done with that, I let themselves see themselves on video and to see how they were gonna come out in this project. And all of them agreed to, besides the release forms, they got to see themselves in video. So for example, one of the things they say, like, okay, that's good, just change the voice or do something with the voice. Okay, so I did that. Something else I didn't want to do, I didn't want to know their real names, who they work for. So if I was to try to track them down or look for them again, I couldn't. And I designed this project that way. But when it comes to risk, I mean, there was one time that I was very scared because I was with one of the guys in a car and he had a gun. And I said, if police like stop us for any reason, I mean, what am I gonna tell them? I'm working on the project. They're not gonna believe me. I'm gonna go to jail. So there's gotta be a little bit of craziness in you. And that little craziness, I think I have it less every time. I think about those things less, you know, I don't do those things anymore. So I think that was my last project, but I mean, there's no way to control like risk, I think.
Thank you for that. Well, we hope that you stay safe for sure.
The hardest part is it's done.
Good. Okay, Murphy, what do you have to say about this? You cover such a wide variety of stories in Hermosillo and Sonora.
Yeah. So I guess what I say right out of the gates is given the sorts of things that we're covering down here, you know, the majority of the areas that we're going into, you know, we're not necessarily doing the sorts of stories that do with some frequency in Mexico get folks into some pretty serious situations. But that does not mean that we don't sometimes explore more sensitive subjects. So I guess I'll just talk about, you know, those times when we are doing things that might represent a little bit more risk than some of our other coverage. I think maybe just a very concrete example. Kendall and I went to the Mormon community in northeastern Sonora in the wake of the horrific massacre of 9 women and children near the Sonora and Chihuahua border. And we drove, and our route took us pretty close to where this really quite horrific thing occurred. And in that case, and in other comparable cases, we were in contact with folks in those communities beforehand. We were asking questions about what it was like there on the ground, and given the fairly sizable security response in the wake of that, honestly, like the week after that occurred was probably one of the safer times to go to that part of the state. But certainly, a fair amount of prep work, and then we went together. Typically, we'll report our features on our own, but in this case, we drove together specifically because of some of the security concerns. Our bosses knew where we were. They had contacts to folks that we were going to be meeting with. So I mean, certainly, some, I think, pretty sensible precautions, measures like that, but certainly nothing terribly extreme. Just trying to defer to local expertise. They're, the people you're going to report on are the ones that, they know their communities, they know what's safe and what's not. And just, I generally I'm just a very risk averse person. I certainly respect reporters who do important work from dangerous places. We're all better for it. But that's, I generally look to minimize risk to myself when I'm reporting. And I need to put this in probably the most important context, which is that I'm a U.S. national reporting in Mexico, and it is a decidedly different situation for Mexicans reporting in their own country, and it's also just a very regionally. It's just as Mexico is not universally or uniformly violent, it's not uniformly dangerous for reporters. There are a handful of states in Mexico where things are quite horrific for reporters, probably most infamously Veracruz. Sonora, some bad things have happened, but has generally speaking been one of the safer, well, I think maybe less dangerous is the way to say it, less dangerous states for reporters. But that being said, our Sonoran colleagues here, there's a lot of things between being perfectly safe and being buried in the desert. There's, there are even though Sonora maybe hasn't had as many cases as some other states, certainly some of our colleagues here have faced some pretty scary stuff. And I just want to make it very clear that, my individual situation here is just very distinct from our Mexican colleagues who are working at least as hard for a lot less money and facing a lot more risks. And then I think probably the most important part of your question was about, protecting the people we're working with. Like I said, most of our coverage, we're not necessarily going to be getting into things that are going to come back and hurt people, but sometimes we do. And I think it's really important when speaking with vulnerable sources for stories, especially people who have likely not spoken with the media before, is to make sure that they have just a very clear understanding of who you are, what your intentions are, where things are going to be published and how, and to make sure that they feel control over the conversation that is being had. They know where it's going, and that they also don't have to tell you things if they don't want to or feel comfortable doing so. So I just try to be extremely transparent. And then there are also instances where sometimes just a part of it, not a full name will be given. Kendall's actually got a story coming out soon where just a first name is used for an asylum seeker from Mexico, because she fears, and I think rightly so, the possibility of being tracked down by people she fears in her home state. So yeah, I think a lot of the people I speak with are fairly media savvy. I'm not the first reporter they've spoken to, and I think you can be pretty casual in those situations. But yeah, when these people don't up and leave their communities for no reason, and I think it's really important to respect the very real dangers they may face back home or even where you're conducting the interview.
Thanks for that, Murphy. You bring up some really interesting points. Just to put things into perspective, you mentioned that people who are working for US-based news outlets or who are American citizens working in Mexico are much, they have much more protections compared to their, Mexican counterparts, where in Mexico, for folks who don't know, over the past 20 years, more than 150 journalists have been killed. And among those 151, I believe, was an American. So the rest have been journalists from Mexico, from the peripheral states that you mentioned, Veracruz, and those peripheral states, Tabasco, and states that are on the kind of periphery, not the center of the country. April, bringing things back to where you are, we know that you've been covering a lot of protests where journalists are sometimes being attacked. I wondered if you could talk about what the law enforcement sort of situation was like in Minneapolis and in DC when you were covering the insurrection, and maybe some things that you did to try to protect yourself, and maybe things that your organization did to try to protect you as well.
Well, before I get to Minneapolis, because there's actually two examples that I want to give, because unlike Luis and Murphy, I am a woman. And so the challenges are different, especially when you're by yourself. And so, of course, just like in general, being a woman and being by yourself in certain areas or just anywhere can be problematic. But I would say, at least working wise, the first time that I actually felt it was when I was in North Dakota. And so something that I've just learned in time in general, if I'm ever by myself and I'm working on something, is that there are certain places that are always going to help you. So it's good to identify yourself. So when I got to Williston, the first place that I went to was a Catholic church because they had a mass in Spanish. So I knew that they could help, but I also knew that whatever would go on in the town, they would keep me informed and they would try to help me. And so when I went to North Dakota, I drove there from Tucson. I did New Mexico, Wyoming, etc. And I did all that. I was literally like basically living out of my car. Like I had packed it up, I was eating, I was doing everything in my car. And then when I got there, I was I was hotel hopping. And there was one hotel that I stayed at that was a Super 8 that was very dingy. It was not good, but it was cheap. And that's I ran out of money while I was in North Dakota. And I go to the church, and just like in casual conversation, I'm like, I just moved into the Super 8 and I'm really not liking it, but everywhere else that I go is just so expensive. And gosh, the cold weather's getting to me. So I tell them that, and the woman at the front desk are immediately like, which Super 8? And I was like, oh, the one right off the main strip. And they were like, you need to get out of there now. And I was like, okay. So I go to the hotel. And one of the things about Williston is that it's in the middle of nowhere. It's a town of a couple hundred people. And I had lost cell service after I left Denver. So I was pretty much operating off of any Wi-Fi that I could find. Cash wise, the ATM, it took me 3 days to get money out of the ATM because there was no money in the ATM. And so in terms of B-roll for my documentary, I was kind of light because I'm just like, where are the people? There's no people walking around. Like, where do they gather? And so when I'm coming back to the hotel, I noticed that there's like kind of like this makeshift car show, bike show type deal in the lot of the hotel. So I stop and I take video, and it is just this huge group of guys. And I pull out my camera, and already I'm just like, there's just too many guys here. And I pull out my camera and I kind of like stick around by my car, and I'm just kind of like feeling really wary. And one guy comes up to me and he's like, hey, what are you working on? I'm like, I'm just working on a piece related to the oil industry. And he's like, okay, for who? And I'm like, for a university. And then he comes up, and then more men start coming over. And granted, all they could have been is just curious, which is fine. But also I was by myself and I had no one to turn to. And so they start crowding me, and I started to feel very uncomfortable. I just like literally the hairs on the back of my neck started to stand up, and I got this gut feeling that I needed to leave. So I packed up, I go to the room, grab my things, check out. They were trying to get me to stay and trying to book me for the whole week. And I'm like, no, like, give me my money. I need to go. So I leave and I go to the new hotel. I turn in. The next morning, I woke up kind of late, and I have just, my phone was blown up. Several missed calls and texts from the woman at the church. And I called them back, and I was like, I'm sorry, I fell asleep. Like, what's going on? She's like, did you leave the hotel? And I said, yes. And she said, there was a shooting and somebody died. And they were concerned for me, which, I mean, not even my mom doesn't know this. I actually don't even know if Celeste knows this. She's my she's my thesis chair. But
you never told me this story, April.
So, I mean, number one, like, I knew to get out immediately because those women said, get out. And then after that happened, like, I had someone who was able to check up on me and say, are you okay? And all that helped because I had these women advocating for me, and because I also like came in and I identified myself. So that was by myself. here in Minneapolis, I was prepared to go by myself, but I got here on Sunday. Friday, I got word that I was gonna have a security guard. We all had security detail. I had one guard, and then the other teams, the photographers, reporters, they had 2 guards each, like 1 per person. And so I have worked with fixers in the past, but it's somewhat similar, but not exactly, because like the security guard is like literally there to protect you for you, which it was new for me, but it was super helpful because when you're by yourself and you're trying to keep an eye out for good details that you can use in your story, I'm trying to keep another eye out for the people around you in terms of like, you know, what are they saying? What are they doing? You're trying to listen. All your senses are completely occupied on the camera, what's on the other side of the camera. It's difficult to follow everything else that's around you. And so like yesterday when we were outside the courthouse and the crowd started to get bigger and bigger, my security guard was right behind me. And I mean, like everyone started jumping and cheering, but everyone was bumping into me. And so my security guard like literally got in front. He was like, ah. And that was something completely new, but I'll admit it's really nice to have. Now, I mean, it's a good thing that things turned out that the way they did. So he was prepared for the worst. I don't want to necessarily say that I was prepared for the worst because I don't think I think I was, but also I probably wasn't, because yes, I've been in protests, but the type of protest that would have happened if he was acquitted, I have never been in. And I'll admit, I have been very nervous for a lot of the work that I've done and a lot of the places that I've gone to, but I've never actually been scared. And coming to Minneapolis, I was very scared. And not even because of the protests itself and like any riots or whatever that would happen, but more so the implications of it. I mean, George Floyd's death hit me really hard. I had to take time off of work, and I did get a good series out of it about Afro-Latinos and our involvement and our place within the Black Lives Matter movement, especially a lot of the anti-Blackness that happens within the community that I have felt as a light-skinned woman, but that I have witnessed in my mother, who is Dominican and she is Black. And so George Floyd hit me in a really special place. And so when the verdict was read, I really wanted to cry. And actually, I haven't. But I didn't, because, you know, everyone around was happy. And of course, then I got happy. But I was terrified to see that level of anger that people have and that level of disappointment and sadness that you have that leads you to burn things. I mean, when I first got here and I went to a restaurant to eat, I asked her, you know, what's around town that I can see? And she was like, well, in this area, we used to have a lot of shopping, but it all burned down last summer. And I was terrified to witness that, because that's just a level of anger and a level of disappointment that's different. I mean, it's different than the kind of sadness that you see in people who cross the desert. I mean, I'm not at all discounting that people who cross the desert, I'm not invalidating it at all. But there's a difference in the way that people here feel when there is a system that is supposed to protect you, that is supposed to be there for you, and every single time it disappoints you and it is against you. And I mean, yeah, I was terrified, and everything here downtown is boarded up to the teeth. And I could already just imagine like just everything burning around me. And I was so scared to see that. But thankfully, for once now, there is accountability on a major level. And I don't know, hopefully some change will come of it. I mean, you know, I talked to a friend of mine last night and she put it in the best words possible. She was like, I wasn't surprised that they found him guilty because it was blatantly obvious. But also, if he wasn't found guilty, I wouldn't be surprised because this is America. And I mean, that's the best. I think that's the best way to put it right there.
Thank you, April. Wow, I really appreciate you being just sharing your feelings and others too in this panel. I can't imagine what it was like hearing that verdict and knowing everything that our country, that your family, you have been through. So one thing, I think I have so many more questions, and one of them is, you know, maybe we can get back to it, and that's like, are we in this moment of transformation, and how can the media transform in the midst of all of this as well? But I do want to get to one of the questions that I, you know, promised that the audience would be able to ask questions of you stellar panelists. And one comes from Rashad Jamal. April, how do you feel about the verdict being the way the verdict came down, with Derek Chauvin being guilty on all three charges? I think you sort of touched on that, but maybe you could maybe elaborate. Looks like your phone might be running out of battery, so you're trying to get it connected. If we have to, we can come back to you, or you can maybe take the question now, or should we come back?
I'm connected.
Okay.
So we were outside of the courthouse in that little grassy patch, you know, waiting for the verdict to come out. And so there were members of the Floyd family who did come out. They did a prayer, and other people started gathering, and the crowd started to get bigger and bigger. I was doing a Facebook Live, and someone had pulled out their phone, and they were just like, oh, they're in the courtroom, they're getting ready to read. And so it got like super quiet. And then someone yells, guilty. And then everyone's like, yeah, guilty. And then it got quiet, and everyone's like, what are the charges? And then so then you hear all three, and everyone's like, all three. And then like it's just this immediate, like everyone's like chanting all three. And they're like, say his name, George Floyd. And they do George Floyd, and then they start saying some other names like Breonna Taylor. And so it was just like this immediate happiness, and people started crying. People were hugging. I mean, there are some people who like just legit fell to the floor, and they were so happy. And then of course, you know, you have your journalists, like the photogs are buzzing in through the crowd with all their gear, and the journalists are doing their live shots and stuff like that. And then, so that was outside the courthouse. And then from there, I moved to the memorial outside of Cup Foods. And that's where they had like the cookout. There was more chanting. That's where the band was. You could, and even after, so at the courthouse, even after like they started gathering there and they were chanting, there was a group that broke off into the street, and they were marching through the street. People had like their BLM flags, their fist flags. And then cars started coming towards the courthouse, and just like people are honking, and everyone's just like super happy. And there's one woman I interviewed, her name was Justice. And I mean, she's a Minneapolis native, and she actually was from the area where Cup Foods is. And she was just like, I'm so glad that finally we have accountability. And I'm so glad that, you know, there's a right decision, and that I have something that I can tell my kids, because she had brought her kids with her, who they were way too young to even really understand what's going on. But she's like, my kids are a part of history, and even if they don't necessarily remember this down the line, I'll be able to tell them like, we were there, we saw this. So yeah, I mean, that was the best part, is like seeing the guilty verdict. That was the best part. And afterwards / this morning, I did, because since I was out there, I did not actually see the live feed from in the courtroom. And so, you know, he had this face where he was just like, "Ugh," and then he gets up and they put the handcuffs on him and he walks away and you're like, so yeah.
Thanks for that, April. We have a question from Colin Deeds. What advice would you give UA students aspiring to be journalists and hoping to work in Latin America? Maybe we could go to Luis Carlos and then Murphy and come back to April. You have to unmute yourself though, Luis.
You can start, Murphy.
Okay, Murphy, go ahead. What advice?
Let's see. What advice would I give? I guess, I mean, if you're in the Latin American Studies program, that was a part of my path, and here I am as a journalist working in Latin America. So I think there might be something there. I think that journalism schools are very valuable. I went to J school before my master's degree. I think you learn a lot of specific and important skills in journalism programs. And I should also say I was sort of an honorary or kind of an interloper of sorts in the UAJ school because LAS is a pretty flexible program. There's a lot of classes you can take in a lot of different programs under that umbrella. But I really do think it's extremely important to have just a lot of subject matter, maybe not necessarily expertise, but just like really in-depth knowledge of the topics and countries or places where you might be. And during my time at LAS, I spent a tremendous amount of time on the border in Mexico, and I think that set me up pretty well for the work I'm doing now. I guess so. I'm a full-time employee of KJZZ. I guess I'd also just say, like, I've got a lot of friends and contacts down in Mexico City and some other parts of Latin America that have made it work outside of a formal full-time job, have had reasonable success doing it as freelancers. That's probably not something that fits with kind of the person I am. I like having benefits and some degree of security, but I know and have a lot of respect for folks who make that happen for themselves. Thank
you for that, Murphy. And we loved having you interlope into the School of Journalism.
Right. Glad I was welcome.
Yes, always. Luis Carlos, what, for folks interested, you worked in Chile, Colombia, of course, the US-Mexico borderlands. What kinds of advice would you give for folks interested in covering the region?
Okay, so I think studying cinema, even though they want to go into journalism, but I think that learning like filmmaking and cinema is like the main currency, right? You learn the visuals, audio, and all that stuff, writing, and it's gonna give you like a complete understanding, and you can use it for journalism in other areas. Also, like as a student or even now, you can start working on projects. Like, even with your phone, with a small camera, you have, things are available now. So I think you should start making it, even like a small piece. You can do a small piece, throw it out online, see what people think about it. but start now. I see it as like a sport, you know, the more you do it, the better you get at it. Learn storytelling, like storytelling overall, you know. And I see this something to like when you read a lot of like books on storytelling, they always say like don't follow stereotypes, break stereotypes. But I see people keep doing it over and over. It's like we're trained, we don't even think about it. So I really think that we have to like start thinking different and breaking stereotypes. It seems like, for example, for Latin America, it seems like the storytelling of the world was designed like a piece of cake. Okay, for Mexico, Latin America, you can tell these kind of stories. For the US, this kind of stories. For Europe, this kind of stories. So we have to break those stereotypes. I mean, it's crazy that we're like in this year and we're keep telling the same stories, same stereotypes. I mean, this has to end. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities, a lot of different things. So I think that there's a chance, you know, when you go to a community, try to spend time there, try to get to know it. Don't see that community or people like maybe like something exotic, you know, get to know how they think, how they live, and try to get people involved in your stories and try to like, for reals, like, sometimes we don't even think that we're just repeating stories, or we just when you stop repeating those same stories, that's when you're gonna find the new narratives, and that's what we need. But so we have to like really like kind of sometimes erase what we have in our head about certain parts of the world or how they want to see certain parts of the world, and start trying to tell like different stories. There's a lot of space for that.
Some really, really great points. And I think that there's some awakening going on too, given the moment that we're in, and people are, not all people who are working in news media or media in general are breaking stereotypes, but certainly I think there's a growing awareness in what you're talking about. It's such a great point. April, what kinds of advice would you give to folks who are interested in being journalists in Latin America and covering the region?
Well, if you're in the program, I always advocate for taking Celeste classes. They're beyond helpful, not just in terms of like the actual curriculum, but I mean, everything outside of the curriculum as well. But off of that, I highly recommend, and also going off of what Luis said, I highly recommend go to as many border cities as you can. I mean, visit different sections of the border from different states that are on the border. Just try to get a sense of what the entire region is like. Because I mean, Nogales is different from Tijuana. Tijuana is different from Juarez. On both sides, it's different. And a lot of, you know, to break some of these stereotypes, you got to learn, and you learn by seeing, by doing. And what better way than going to the source? And I mean, you don't have to go for a story. You could just go to hang out, go to look, go to have a meal. And there, maybe while you're walking to the restaurant for lunch, you see something, you're like, oh, this would be a nice story. And then there you go. It can build off of that. But there's something that I saw in the chat that somebody had said, that like journalists, we always have to have like this sense, we always have to be objective, and that people forget that we are humans. And so going off of like with this whole Latin America thing, because even though I am like right now I'm working on here in Minneapolis, but in terms of, well, with Latin America, I feel like I keep saying Latin America so many times. But what I'm trying to say is that, and a lot of people are going to say different things. And me coming from a hard news background, that whole idea of objectivity and being unbiased is drilled into you. And you have to like turn it off essentially. And when I got to Arizona, and I'm originally from Florida, so just my relationship with the border and the border region was completely different. I mean, when I moved to Arizona, it was the first time that I went through a border patrol checkpoint. The first time that I had been stopped and checked by Border Patrol. There are a lot of firsts for me, and a lot of things that, yes, I knew about prior, but I had never actually seen or witnessed or been through. And that was a whole different experience. And so through my time at UA, like the more that I did and the more that I learned, I started to realize, like, is objectivity even real? I mean, even more so when the Trump administration started, which is around the time that I was at UA. And, you know, Trump, here he is saying, calling, you know, illegals and criminals and rapists and all this stuff. And then for women, oh, there's all that stuff even before, you know, grab them right in the, and then just all these things that he was saying. And I started to feel, I was starting to really, you know, like, hold on a second. I mean, here we have an administration, a person, so many people outside of the admin, you know, Joe Schmo walking down the street who feels empowered to say whatever. You have all these people who are like attacking me and everything that I am, because while yes, I am a journalist, before that, I'm a woman. Before that, I am the daughter of immigrants. Before that, I'm an Afro-Latina. And he is attacking me. He's attacking my mother, my family, my friends. And I started to feel, I didn't know how to deal with it. I was like, how do I stay objective? And so that's when I essentially I threw that out the window. And so in terms of Latin America, what I'm saying is, well, yes, you know, yes, listen to all sides, granted within reason, because I do believe that there are some objectives that, or some sides that aren't sides. It's just hate, it's just ignorance, and a lot of times it is flat out fake news. And so if you have a stance, especially considering to human rights, because a lot of the issues that happen along the border in Latin America involve human rights. And if you're reporting on human rights and you're going to take X stance, stick to your guns. That's what I'm saying, is stick to your guns, because a lot of people are going to tell you all this stuff about objectivity and all this stuff about, well, what about this person? And you say, well, my story's on the immigrant. My story's on XYZ. I don't need to go talk to the PIO of the Border Patrol who's just going to read me some piece of paper that was blasted out to every social media outlet. So in terms of, you know, like what advice, if you want to do it, stick to your guns, focus on the people, because there's going to be plenty of other reporters out there who are going to go to Border Patrol, who are going to go to ICE, who are going to go to the talking heads, whose job is to stand at a microphone and repeat whatever figures that the US government or that whoever wants to get out there, whether they be factual, whether they not be factual, whatever it may be. So focus on the people, report, you know, talk about what's around you. If, you know, this whole seminar is about like taking you there, not everyone can go to where you are. So try to describe it as best as you can. Bring in those elements of sound, of visuals, bring in the storytelling. There's a lot that you can do. And, you know, a lot of people are going to give advice, and a lot of people are going to say a lot of things. But at the end of the day, you are going to know what's real, essentially, especially if it's a story that you are invested in, that you are knowledgeable about, that maybe it hits you close to home, whatever it may be. Also do your research, but whatever it may be, just stick to your guns. I mean, you'll know what's best. And a lot of times that little gut feeling or that little voice in the back of your head can be really useful to listen to, if that helps.
That helps a lot. You all had just wonderful words of wisdom. And well, I know I didn't teach objectivity in my classes that you were in, April. I mean, that's It's a 19th century notion that is carried over until the 20th century, 21st century, that even historians, I'm a historian, have grappled with. It's impossible. In fact, you might want to read The Impossible Dream by Peter Novak about this issue of objectivity and how it's unattainable. Anyway, I'm glad you brought up those points. Any questions? We've got a few minutes left. Questions from the audience? If you want to just jump in, you can unmute yourself. Let's see, we've got, okay,
Yeah,
lots of kudos for you. Incredible thanks to all of you. Plus Objective was all developed to sell ads, says Professor Maggie Sanger. Thank you for that. Dr. Relli, did you want to ask a question?
Well, and what's just such an amazing panel, and thank you for all the great questions, Dr. González de Bustamante. This is kind of not a question to end on, so I hope someone jumps in after me, but I'm just curious about where you all think, and this is a very instrumental question after such a deep hour-and-a-half session, but what are your thoughts about folks doing things on their phones, like video? And I know, Luis, you talked about your work, right? And it, how compelling you felt it was, and a lot of it was on your phone, smartphone. But we're talking about working with some folks in Yemen, and Maggie was suggesting, Professor Sanger was suggesting phones because there just isn't a lot of infrastructure and so forth. So I don't know. Do you think? I mean, say you were not thinking of the Western Hemisphere, but another part of the world or the Western Hemisphere. What are your thoughts about whether you think you could run news or other types of work, like the work you're doing, from a phone? Does that sound feasible?
Okay, I think you can work on your phone, but do it right. So one of the mistakes that I see is that, since everybody has a phone, they think they can produce media, and it's very easy and it's very difficult. So basically, if you're gonna use the phone, try to have a good phone, try to have a system to capture audio as well. If you're gonna have a tripod, have a tripod. If you're gonna have a Steadicam, have a Steadicam. So do use your phone, but do it right, not just the phone without a microphone. So really prepared, buy a small kit, invest in it, and you can do it with for example, like an iPhone, 4K, but do it the right way. That's what I think.
Thank you.
And don't forget about audio,
And editing there too.
I mean,
just think of extreme.
Okay, I think you can do it. You can edit on phone because there's a lot of applications. You can do that, but I mean, at least I think it would be better on a computer to actually see everything bigger, organize stuff. I try to edit stuff on application. To me, I think that's the thing, when it comes to editing, it's a lot of work. So that's another challenging part. So you can capture the image, but the editing part, I mean, you could do it on the phone, but if it was up to me, I would still try to have a small computer with a good software, and the RAM and all that stuff. And I can see everything bigger, but that's me. I don't like to edit nothing on the phone. Maybe capture it, yes.
Thanks so much.
That's me.
That's great.
So actually, I did come stacked to Minneapolis. I brought 2 cameras, 2 tripods, all kinds of stuff. But then, of course, since we didn't know how protests were going to turn out, I mean, I did bring some of my own personal gear, but also most of what I brought is company gear. And so there was that concern of if it's stolen, if it's broken, or if it's whatever. So I have done everything that I've done in Minneapolis since I got here has been off of the phone. It has been off of a company phone. So it is, and I'm actually going to show you guys examples because I've been talking about this microphone set because I wish I had it when I was in Arizona. I don't know how much it cost though. So It's probably expensive though. But so just like I have like a regular iPhone here, and then a Beast grip. This is a pretty basic Beast grip. There are some that have like, you know, the padding and all that stuff, but this is just like a regular one. And you just slip the phone in. You just slip the phone in. And so I have like a shotgun that you can attach to the top. And then it's also got that, because you know the iPhone has that little dongle thingy. So
there you go.
So there's this shotgun, right? But here's the what I like. So we have a wireless set. So we have these little Rhodes, which there's two components. And so you have a handheld mic and you also have a lavalier. You can't use both at the same time, but you can use, you know, you can trade or whatever. So you have the receiver here, which also a little iPhone dongle, and you just, like with the B script, you can just attach it to the top, plug the dongle in, you turn the receiver on, and then you have the other end, which you can clip to a handheld. And you got a handheld here. And then I had the
Lavalier.
Yeah. Hold on.
She's prepared. You know, she has like an iPhone, but she has all that other gear.
This is multimedia. This is what we're talking about now. Now you guys are actually showing us the nitty gritty here. So I love this.
Yeah. I'm actually gonna have to look. I'm gonna have to look for the lavalier. It's somewhere.
It's
in my
probably
gear.
buried in the bag.
But yeah, and so you clip it and then you turn both on and it'll go directly into whatever you're doing. So it'll go directly into the phone. You can also plug it into a DSLR, anything. And it's really good quality. The battery life, it has a really good battery life. And I mean, it's super mobile. I highly recommend this set. The only issue is I have no idea how much it costs. And then in terms of editing, like also like Luis, I do prefer editing on a bigger screen. Here I'm working off of a laptop, but at home, I'm working off of a Mac desktop, and I even connect it to an external monitor so that I have like dual screens. But if you are working off of a laptop, and depending on the laptop, because you know, as Luis was saying, space is really important. But to help so it does, your computer doesn't get all jammed up, highly recommend an external hard drive. Work off of, you can edit directly off of it. You can save everything directly onto it. And I mean, these Lacey's are a little bit expensive. They're like starting price is like $80, $85, but these are super durable. Like I could throw this on the floor and nothing will happen to it. But I mean, you can, you know, take it wherever and you can hop from computer to computer. So yeah, I definitely recommend those. Now though, I saw something in the chat, something about like somebody, if you're in a war zone, I unfortunately cannot speak to that.
Maggie Zanger said, if you're in a war zone, it can be done on an iPhone.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Or probably an Android, since it would be less expensive.
Yeah. Murphy, did you have anything else to add to that? Do you have any audio toys you want to bring out?
Thank you, everybody.
I mean, yeah, I don't do a lot of video production, so I don't have as much experience using phones for stuff like that. But phones during the pandemic have become a lot more important. One trick that we've used is because we're not doing nearly as much in-person stuff, to actually have folks sync themselves with their phones, and if done right, and if done with someone who's reasonably savvy, you can actually get audio. I mean, the audio quality of even just like the internal iPhone mic can be substantially better than what you get just recording a regular conversation. And if done well, I mean, it's, you know, for a listener, it could be pretty close to indistinguishable from having pointed a fancy expensive mic in their face. So yeah, they've been, that little trick has been pretty handy.
Great. Thank you.
Wow, well, I want to be respectful of folks' time here because you all have, I know, been working really hard and really appreciate you just sharing all of your experiences. This has been one of the best panels I've moderated in a long time, so I really appreciate all of your just being so candid and forthcoming about all of your experiences. And I know that people who were in the room with us feel the same. I will just like to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon, evening, on the behalf of the Center for the Latin American Studies and the Center for Border and Global Journalism. We'd like to thank all of you who came to the panel, and of course, thanks once again to our stellar panelists. Good luck in all your endeavors, and we are just so happy to see you so successful. Thanks, everyone.